3 days before walking down the aisle, my fiancée Emma spent $40,000 acquiring exclusive promotional rights to a travel documentary series. The catch: it was created by Ryan Mitchell, the adventure blogger she dated in college. When local news stations approached me for a comment about this unusual business decision so close to our wedding, I simply smiled and said, "Supporting someone's creative journey is admirable." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I hope their collaboration brings them both success. What I didn't mention was the sick feeling in my stomach, or how Emma had been working late every single night for the past 4 months. Always on calls with Ryan about his revolutionary travel content. That evening, as the interview aired, on Seattle's evening news, Emma stormed into our shared downtown loft. She'd been staying at her office more often than home lately, claiming the travel marketing industry demanded constant attention. What kind of ridiculous response was that, Alex? You made it sound like I'm having some kind of romantic reunion with an ex-boyfriend. Do you realize how that makes me look professionally? Her voice carried a sharp edge I'd been hearing more frequently. I need you to call them back and clarify that this is purely a business investment. Ryan's content has massive potential, and my agency needs to stay ahead of the curve. Standing there in our kitchen, surrounded by wedding planning materials, scattered across the granite counter, I felt something shift inside me. Emma's defensive reaction told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about business innovation or staying competitive in the digital marketing world. I fell in love with into someone obsessed with elevating Ryan's mediocre travel blog to influencer status. I'd actually taken the time to watch Ryan's content after Emma first mentioned partnering with him. His travel videos were generic at best, featuring the same sunset shots and basic travel tips that thousands of other bloggers were already producing. His writing lacked depth, his photography was amateur, and his storytelling felt forced and unnatural. Yet Emma spoke about his work as if he were the next Anthony Bourdain, constantly praising his authentic voice and unique perspective on adventure travel. The truth was, Emma's agency had been struggling for the past year. Several major clients had dropped their contracts, citing disappointing engagement rates and lackluster campaign results. Emma had become increasingly desperate to find the next big travel influencer to represent, someone who could restore her agency's reputation in the competitive Seattle marketing scene. When Ryan reached out to her through LinkedIn, claiming he was ready to take his brand to the next level, Emma saw an opportunity to prove herself again. Ryan had always been charming in that effortless way that made people want to follow him anywhere. In college, he'd convinced Emma to skip classes for spontaneous road trips and weekend camping adventures. He represented the carefree, adventurous lifestyle that Emma had gradually abandoned as she built her career and settled into our stable, comfortable relationship. I learned later that their late-night strategy sessions had evolved into something much more personal. Emma would spend hours on video calls with Ryan, supposedly discussing content calendars and brand partnerships, but increasingly talking about their shared memories and dreams of traveling the world together. Ryan fed into Emma's growing dissatisfaction with her predictable life, constantly suggesting that she was too creative and adventurous to be tied down by conventional expectations. Meanwhile, I was completely focused on preparing for our wedding and managing my architectural firm's biggest project yet, designing a sustainable housing complex that would set new environmental standards for the Pacific Northwest. I was so absorbed in creating something meaningful and lasting that I missed the signs of Emma's emotional withdrawal. She stopped asking about my work, stopped sharing details about her days, and began treating our relationship like a business arrangement that was no longer serving her interests. The morning after my television interview, Emma's assistant Jessica called me instead of Emma herself. Jessica had worked for Emma's agency for 3 years and had always been professional but warm in our interactions. This time her tone was cold and dismissive. "Alex, Emma is completely booked with client meetings for the next several days. She's asked me to handle any wedding-related communications through her assistant channels. If you need to discuss the media situation, please schedule an appointment through the proper channels." The formal language felt like a slap in the face. Emma and I had been together for 6 years, engaged for 18 months, and now I was being treated like a problematic vendor who needed to be managed through official channels. I could hear the smugness in Jessica's voice, as if she took pleasure in creating distance between Emma and me. When I tried calling Emma directly, my calls went straight to voicemail. Her social media showed her posting constantly about exciting new projects and life-changing collaborations. But she couldn't find 5 minutes to speak with her fiancé about our wedding that was supposed to happen in 72 hours. That's when I decided to dig deeper into this mysterious business partnership that was consuming Emma's life. Using my connections in Seattle's business community, I discovered that Emma hadn't just purchased promotional rights to Ryan's content. She'd invested nearly her entire emergency fund into creating a comprehensive media campaign designed to transform Ryan from a struggling blogger into a major travel influencer. She'd hired professional photographers to shoot new headshots, paid for a complete website redesign, purchased promoted posts across multiple social media platforms, and even arranged for Ryan to appear as a guest on several popular travel podcasts. The $40,000 she'd spent was just the beginning of a much larger financial commitment that she'd hidden from me completely. More disturbing was learning that Ryan had moved to Seattle 2 months earlier, renting an apartment just 6 blocks from our loft. Emma had helped him find the place and had been meeting with him regularly at trendy coffee shops and co-working spaces throughout the city. What she'd described as remote collaboration was actually an intense, in-person creative partnership that was blurring the lines between professional and personal in ways that made my stomach turn. The final piece of the puzzle came from Marcus, my business partner at the architectural firm. He'd been trying to reach me about a potential client meeting when he saw Emma and Ryan together at an upscale restaurant in Capitol Hill. They weren't discussing business strategy or reviewing marketing materials. They were holding hands across the table, laughing intimately, and looking at each other with the kind of intensity that belonged between lovers, not business partners. Marcus hesitated to tell me what he'd witnessed, knowing how much I was looking forward to the wedding. But he also couldn't stand by and watch me walk into a marriage with someone who was clearly emotionally invested in another relationship. When he finally shared what he'd seen, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with devastating disappointment. Everything suddenly made perfect sense. Emma's constant distraction, her defensive reactions to innocent questions, her sudden passion for a mediocre travel blogger's career, her inability to focus on our wedding planning despite having dreamed about our ceremony for over a year. She wasn't just having second thoughts about our relationship. She was actively building a new life with someone else while keeping me as a safety net in case her romantic gamble didn't pay off. The most painful realization was understanding how little respect Emma had for me during this process. Rather than having an honest conversation about her changing feelings or her reconnection with Ryan, she'd chosen to lie, manipulate, and deceive me while I remained completely focused on building our future together. She'd turned our relationship into a facade while pursuing what she really wanted behind my back. As I sat in our loft that evening, surrounded by wedding invitations that would never be sent and looking at architectural plans for the house I'd been designing for us to share, I realized that Emma had already made her choice. The only question remaining was whether I would continue playing the role of the oblivious fiancé or finally demand the truth about what was really happening between Emma and her mysterious first love. The next morning I woke up to find Emma's side of the bed untouched. Her pillow was still perfectly fluffed, and the book she'd been pretending to read for weeks remained closed on her nightstand. I checked my phone and found a text message sent at 3 a.m, staying at the office tonight to finalize some urgent client presentations. Need to focus without distractions. What kind of client presentations required all night? Sessions 2 days before our wedding? Decided to find out for myself. After brewing coffee and forcing down half a piece of toast, I drove to Emma's agency office in the South Lake Union District. The building's parking garage was nearly empty. Except for security vehicles and a few dedicated workaholics, Emma's BMW wasn't there. I called the office directly and asked the overnight security guard if anyone from Wanderlust Digital Marketing was currently in the building. He checked his logs and confirmed that no one had entered or exited the office since 6 p.m. the previous evening. Emma had lied about working late, which meant she'd spent the night somewhere else entirely. My phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. Emma had posted a story showing a sunrise view from what appeared to be a high-end hotel room. The caption read, "Early morning inspiration session. Sometimes the best ideas come when you step outside your comfort zone." The timestamp showed she'd posted it 20 minutes earlier, and the location tag revealed she was at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel downtown. I'd designed the interior renovation for that hotel's executive suites 3 years earlier. I knew the layout intimately, including which rooms had the best sunrise views. Okay. Emma was staying in one of the premium suites, the kind that cost $800 per night? Either her agency was doing much better than she'd led me to believe, or someone else was funding her sudden taste for luxury accommodations. Instead of confronting her directly, I decided to visit Ryan's apartment. I'd gotten his address from the lease information Emma had carelessly left on our kitchen counter weeks earlier. The building was a modern complex in Belltown, the kind of place that attracted young professionals and aspiring creatives who wanted to live in the heart of Seattle's nightlife district. When I arrived at his building, I noticed Emma's BMW parked in a visitor space near the entrance. The parking receipt on her dashboard showed she'd been there since the previous afternoon, so much for working late at the office. Emma had spent the entire night with Ryan, probably planning their next phase while I waited at home like a fool. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, watching the building entrance and trying to process the reality of my situation. Emma wasn't just having doubts about our wedding. She was actively living a double life with another man. The woman I'd planned to marry in 48 hours was waking up in Ryan's bed while sending me lies about client presentations and work commitments. Around 9 in the morning, Emma emerged from the building looking refreshed and energetic. In a way I hadn't seen in months. She was carrying the same overnight bag she usually brought on business trips, and she was laughing at something on her phone as she walked to her car. The casual way she handled this deception suggested it wasn't her first overnight stay at Ryan's place. I followed her car from a distance, curious to see where she'd go next. Instead of heading to her office or back to our loft, Emma drove directly to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. She parked in the departures area and began unloading luggage from her trunk. Not just the overnight bag I'd seen earlier, but a large suitcase and what appeared to be photography equipment cases. My heart pounded as I realized what was happening. Emma wasn't just emotionally cheating with Ryan, she was leaving Seattle with him 2 days before our wedding, while I was supposed to be finalizing catering details and confirming RSVPs. My fiancée was departing for what looked like an extended trip with her first love. I parked quickly and hurried into the terminal, staying far enough behind to avoid being noticed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emma met Ryan at the Alaska Airlines check-in counter, where they were clearly traveling together on the same reservation. Ryan had grown his hair longer since his college photos and sported the kind of carefully maintained stubble that travel bloggers seem to favor. He looked exactly like the type of guy who would convince a successful businesswoman to abandon her stable life for adventure and spontaneous romance. They were both animated and excited, discussing their itinerary with the kind of enthusiasm Emma used to show when we planned our own trips together. Ryan kept touching her arm and leaning close to whisper in her ear, while Emma responded with the genuine laughter I hadn't heard from her in months, watching them together. I could see the chemistry that had drawn them to each other in college and was now pulling Emma away from our relationship. I managed to overhear enough of their conversation to learn they were flying to Vancouver, then connecting to an international flight. The departure board showed several options: London, Amsterdam, Bangkok, and Tokyo, based on Ryan's travel blog. Content, they were likely heading to Southeast Asia. For what? Emma was probably calling a business research trip, but was obviously a romantic getaway. The most painful part was observing how natural and comfortable they looked together. Emma moved with a lightness and spontaneity that had disappeared from our relationship over the past year. She was animated, playful, and completely absorbed. In Ryan's attention, this wasn't a woman having a momentary crisis of commitment. This was someone who had rediscovered a version of herself that she'd forgotten existed. I waited until they'd gone through security before returning to my car. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. Not from anger, but from the surreal realization that my life had completely changed in the span of 2 hours. Emma wasn't coming home to discuss wedding details or address our relationship problems. She was flying to another continent with the man she'd been secretly rebuilding her life around. The drive back to our loft felt like traveling through a completely different city. Every familiar landmark looked foreign and meaningless. The coffee shop where Emma and I used to meet for weekend breakfast dates. The bookstore where we'd spent hours browsing together. The park where I'd proposed 18 months earlier. All of it belonged to a relationship that had apparently ended without my knowledge. Back home, I began searching through Emma's belongings for clues about how long this betrayal had been developing. In her desk drawer, I found printed boarding passes for a trip to Portland 3 weeks earlier. She'd told me it was a solo business conference, but the passes were clearly for 2 people, Emma Rodriguez and Ryan Mitchell. They'd been taking secret trips together while I believed Emma was working overtime to grow her agency. Her laptop was password protected, but Emma had always been careless about digital security. Her password was still our anniversary date, combined with her childhood dog's name. Her email revealed months of correspondence with Ryan that began as professional discussions, but quickly evolved into intimate conversations about their college relationship and shared dreams of traveling the world together. The most devastating email was one Emma had sent to Ryan just 5 days earlier. I can't keep pretending that what we have is just business. Being with you again has reminded me of who I used to be before I got trapped in this safe, predictable life. Alex is a good man, but he represents everything I thought I wanted versus everything I actually need. After the wedding is over, I want to disappear with you and never look back.
Oh.
Reading those words felt like being punched in the chest. Emma hadn't just reconnected with an old flame. She'd been planning her escape from our relationship while allowing me to continue wedding preparations. She was using our wedding as a cover story for her final preparations to start a new life with Ryan. The ceremony I'd been eagerly anticipating was nothing more than a convenient alibi for her ultimate betrayal. I spent the rest of the day calling vendors and venues to cancel our wedding arrangements. The florist was understanding but charged a 50% cancellation fee. The caterer was less sympathetic, insisting that 48 hours' notice wasn't sufficient to avoid the full payment. The photographer offered to reschedule, assuming we were postponing rather than canceling permanently. The hardest call was to my parents, who had flown in from Vancouver the previous day and were staying at a hotel near the wedding venue. My mother answered on the first ring, excited to discuss final details and confirm pickup times for the ceremony. Alex, honey, your father and I just had breakfast with Emma's parents. We're all so excited for tomorrow. Did Emma finalize the music selections for the processional? I took a deep breath and tried to keep my voice steady. Mom, I need to tell you something difficult. The wedding isn't happening. Emma has left Seattle with someone else, and I don't think she's coming back. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds before my mother found her voice again. What do you mean she's left? With whom?
Alex.
What's happening? Explaining the situation to my parents was almost as painful as discovering it myself. They'd grown to love Emma over the 6 years we'd been together, and had been looking forward to officially welcoming her into our family. Learning that she'd been living a double life and planning her departure while accepting their love and support felt like a betrayal of everyone who cared about our relationship. By evening, I'd managed to cancel most of the wedding arrangements and notify the majority of our guests. Some friends expressed outrage on my behalf, while others seemed more shocked than surprised, admitting they'd noticed Emma seemed distracted and distant during recent social gatherings. My best man Marcus arrived at the loft with takeout food and beer, insisting that I shouldn't be alone while processing everything that had happened. I should have told you sooner about seeing them together, Marcus said as we sat on the couch. Surrounded by wedding planning materials, I was too exhausted to pack away. I kept hoping I'd misunderstood what I was witnessing, but deep down I knew Emma was checking out of your relationship. I appreciated Marcus's honesty, but I didn't blame him for my situation. The signs had been there for months. I'd simply chosen to ignore them because acknowledging Emma's emotional departure would have meant confronting the possibility that our relationship was ending. It was easier to believe she was going through a stressful period at work than to accept that she was falling in love with someone else. 3 days after Emma disappeared to Southeast Asia with Ryan, I received a phone call that changed everything. It was Jessica, Emma's assistant, and her voice carried none of the cold professionalism she'd shown me recently. Instead, she sounded panicked and desperate. "Alex, I need to speak with you urgently. Emma's parents are asking questions about the wedding cancellation, and some of her major clients are demanding explanations about missed meetings. She left me with instructions to handle everything, but I have no idea where she actually went, or when she's coming back." I almost laughed at the irony. Emma had abandoned not just our wedding and our relationship, but also her business responsibilities and the people who depended on her. She'd simply vanished into her romantic fantasy, with Ryan leaving everyone else to deal with the consequences of her choices. "Jessica, I don't know any more than you do. Emma made her decision without consulting me about anything. You'll have to figure out how to handle her clients on your own." I was about to hang up when Jessica's next words stopped me cold. "There's something else you need to know." Emma cleaned out the agency's operating account before she left. She transferred nearly $200,000 to a personal account, claiming it was for a major marketing campaign. But I've been through all our client contracts, and there's no project that would justify that kind of expenditure. Revelation hit me like a physical blow. Emma hadn't just run away with Ryan. She'd stolen money from her own company to fund their adventure. The woman I'd planned to marry was not only emotionally unfaithful, but also criminally dishonest. She'd betrayed everyone who trusted her, including her own employees and business partners. Jessica continued, her voice shaking with anxiety. "I've been trying to reach her for 2 days, but all her social media accounts have gone dark. Her phone goes straight to voicemail, and her emergency contacts don't know where she is. I think she's really gone, like permanently gone." After hanging up with Jessica, I sat in my empty loft trying to process this new level of betrayal. Emma hadn't just chosen Ryan over me. She'd planned an elaborate escape that involved stealing from her own company and abandoning all her professional obligations. The woman I thought I knew was apparently capable of deception and theft on a scale I never could have imagined. The following weeks, Emma's disappearance became the subject of intense gossip throughout Seattle's business community. Her agency began losing clients as word spread about missed deadlines and unreturned communications. Jessica and the other employees were left scrambling to maintain relationships with vendors and fulfill existing contracts without any guidance from their missing CEO. The financial situation became even more complicated when Emma's business partner, a silent investor named Robert Kim, discovered the missing funds and threatened legal action. Robert had contributed significant capital to Wanderlust digital marketing based on Emma's reputation and projected growth, and he was furious to learn that his investment had essentially been stolen to fund Emma's romantic escape. I found myself inadvertently involved in the legal proceedings when Robert's attorneys contacted me seeking information about Emma's whereabouts and recent behavior. They wanted to know if I had any knowledge of her financial activities or travel plans that might help them recover the stolen money. While I had no desire to protect Emma after what she'd done to me, I also felt uncomfortable being drawn into her business problems. During one particularly frustrating meeting with Robert's legal team, I learned more about Emma's financial deception than I'd ever wanted to know. Apparently, the $40,000 she'd spent on Ryan's promotional campaign was just the beginning. Over the past 6 months, she'd been systematically draining company resources to fund their relationship, disguising the expenses as legitimate business investments. She'd paid for Ryan's apartment lease, his photography equipment, his travel, expenses for content creation trips, and even his daily living expenses, all while categorizing these payments as marketing expenditures or contractor fees. Emma had been essentially subsidizing Ryan's lifestyle for months, while lying to everyone about the nature of their relationship. The most disturbing discovery was learning that Emma had forged documents to justify some of these expenses. She'd created fake invoices from non-existent vendors and fabricated contracts for services that were never provided. What had started as emotional infidelity had evolved into systematic financial fraud that could result in serious criminal charges. As Seattle's legal and business communities buzzed with rumors about Emma's disappearance and theft, I began receiving unexpected sympathy and attention. Former colleagues reached out to express support and share their own stories about trusting people who ultimately betrayed them. Some offered business opportunities or social invitations, clearly viewing me as the innocent victim of Emma's elaborate deception. While I appreciated the support, the constant reminders of Emma's betrayal were emotionally exhausting. Every conversation seemed to circle back to speculation about her motives, her current whereabouts, or the likelihood that she'd ever return to face the consequences of her actions. I felt trapped in a story that I wanted desperately to escape. The breaking point came during a networking event for Seattle architects where multiple people approached me with questions about Emma's business practices and my knowledge of her financial activities. One particularly aggressive attorney suggested that I might have been complicit in Emma's fraud, implying that no fiancé could be completely unaware of such extensive deception. "Come on, Alex," he said with a knowing smirk. "You're telling me you lived with this woman for years and never noticed anything suspicious about her spending patterns or business operations? That's pretty hard to believe." His accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth that I'd been avoiding. I had noticed Emma's increased spending and secretive behavior, but I'd chosen to trust her explanations rather than investigate. Further, my willingness to give her the benefit of the doubt had enabled her deception and made me look naive to everyone who knew about our relationship. That night, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my entire life. I called my former professor at the University of British Columbia's architecture program and inquired about opportunities for continuing education or research positions. Dr. Sarah Chen had always encouraged her students to think globally about sustainable building practices, and she mentioned that several European universities were offering innovative programs in environmental architecture. Within 2 weeks, I'd been accepted into a graduate research program at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim. The program focused on Arctic building techniques and sustainable construction in extreme climates, topics that had fascinated me since my undergraduate studies, but had never been practical to pursue while building my career in Seattle. The decision to leave the country felt both terrifying and liberating. I'd spent my entire adult life in the Pacific Northwest, building a successful architectural practice and establishing deep roots in the Seattle community. But Emma's betrayal had tainted every familiar place and relationship, making it impossible to move forward without constant reminders of our failed relationship. Marcus was initially shocked by my decision to abandon our architectural firm and move to Norway. We'd built Chen & Associates together from nothing, and the company was finally gaining recognition for innovative, sustainable building projects. My departure would leave him shouldering the entire business operation at a crucial growth period. "Alex, I understand you need space to heal from what Emma did, but running away to Arctic Norway seems extreme. What about our clients? What about the housing complex project you've been designing for 2 years? You're going to throw away everything we've built because of one woman's terrible choices?" Marcus's concerns were valid, but I couldn't explain the depth of my need to completely reinvent my life. Emma's betrayal had revealed how passive and complacent I'd become in every aspect of my existence. I'd been so focused on maintaining stability and meeting expectations that I'd lost touch with my own dreams and ambitions. This crisis was forcing me to confront the reality that I'd been sleepwalking through my own life. The process of dissolving my partnership with Marcus and transferring my clients to other architects was emotionally difficult but necessary. I realized that I'd been using our business success as a substitute for personal growth and adventure. While Marcus was content to continue building our local reputation, I needed to challenge myself in completely unfamiliar territory. My parents were even more concerned about my decision than Marcus had been. They couldn't understand why I was abandoning a successful career and stable life to pursue graduate studies in one of the world's most remote and challenging environments. My mother worried that I was making impulsive decisions based on heartbreak, rather than rational planning. "Sweetheart, I know Emma hurt you terribly, but moving to Norway won't make the pain go away. You're running from your problems instead of dealing with them. What happens when you finish this program and have to come back to real life?" I tried to explain that this wasn't about running away from Emma's betrayal, but about running toward something I'd never been brave enough to pursue. The research program in Trondheim would give me access to cutting-edge environmental building techniques and connect me with international experts in sustainable architecture. It was an opportunity to transform my career in ways that would have been impossible if I'd remained in my comfortable Seattle routine. The hardest part of leaving was selling our loft and dividing the possessions Emma and I had accumulated together. Every item carried memories of our shared life. The dining table we'd bought for our first apartment, the artwork we'd chosen during weekend gallery walks, the kitchen appliances we'd registered for but never used because we always ordered takeout. I donated most of the furniture to charity and packed only my essential belongings and professional materials. The wedding dress Emma had left hanging in our closet went to a consignment shop that specialized in formal wear. I couldn't bring myself to simply throw it away, but I also couldn't bear to keep it as a reminder of promises that had been broken before they could be fulfilled. On my final night in Seattle, I sat on the floor of our empty loft and reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just 6 weeks. Emma's betrayal had shattered my assumptions about love, trust, and the future I'd been planning. But it had also freed me from a relationship that had clearly been unsatisfying for both of us. Her actions had been cruel and dishonest, but they'd also revealed that we were fundamentally incompatible in ways I'd been too comfortable to acknowledge. As I prepared to board my flight to Trondheim the next morning, I felt a mixture of grief for the life I was leaving behind and excitement for the unknown adventures ahead. Emma had chosen Ryan and his promise of spontaneous travel and creative freedom. Now it was time for me to choose my own path, one that would challenge me to become the person I'd always been capable of being, but had never been brave enough to pursue. Trondheim in January was a shock to my system in every possible way. Sun barely crested the horizon for 3 hours each day, casting everything in a perpetual twilight that made me question my sanity for choosing to study Arctic architecture in the middle of polar night. The temperature hovered around -15°C, and the wind off the Norwegian Sea cut through even the heaviest winter gear like it was tissue paper. My first month at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology was a humbling experience that forced me to confront how sheltered my life in Seattle had actually been. The other graduate students in the program came from all over the world, and many had already worked on challenging projects in extreme environments. There was Ingrid from Denmark, who had designed emergency shelters for Arctic research stations, Pavel from Russia, who specialized in permafrost foundation systems, and Chen Wei from Singapore, who had somehow become an expert in snow load calculations despite growing up in tropical weather. The coursework was unlike anything I'd experienced in American architecture programs. We spent weeks learning about traditional Sami building techniques that had sustained indigenous communities in the Arctic for thousands of years. We studied how to construct buildings that could withstand months of continuous darkness, hurricane force, winds, and ground that remained frozen year-round. Every design challenge required us to think beyond conventional architectural solutions and consider how humans could not just survive but thrive in environments that seemed actively hostile to human habitation. My professor, Dr. Eric Nordahl, was a legend in sustainable Arctic architecture who had spent decades perfecting building techniques that worked in harmony with extreme weather rather than fighting against it. He had a way of challenging students that was both intimidating and inspiring, pushing us to abandon everything we thought we knew about construction and design. "Alex," he said during one particularly brutal critique session, "your Seattle buildings are very pretty, but they would collapse in their first Arctic storm. You design like someone who has never been truly cold, never been truly isolated, never had to depend entirely on the structural integrity of your shelter for survival. Until you understand what it means to build for life or death, your architecture will remain merely decorative." His words stung because they were accurate. I had spent years creating beautiful, sustainable buildings for clients who would never face genuine hardship or danger. My designs were sophisticated and environmentally conscious, but they were also safe and predictable, much like the life I'd been living before. Emma's betrayal forced me to question everything. The real transformation began during our February field studies in Svalbard, Norwegian archipelago roughly halfway between mainland Norway and the North Pole. We spent 3 weeks living in research station dormitories while studying how buildings functioned in temperatures that regularly dropped below -30°C. The experience was physically and mentally exhausting, but it also awakened something in me that had been dormant for years. Working in conditions where a design flaw could literally mean death gave every decision profound significance. There was no room for aesthetic choices that didn't serve practical purposes. Every material selection, every structural connection, every ventilation system had to be justified not just by engineering principles, but by survival necessities. For the first time in my career, I was creating architecture that truly mattered. During those long Arctic nights, I found myself thinking less and less about Emma and her betrayal. The immediate demands of surviving in extreme conditions left no mental space for dwelling on past relationships or imagining alternative scenarios. I was too busy learning how to prevent water pipes from freezing, how to design ventilation systems that didn't create deadly ice dams, and how to calculate wind loads that could exceed anything experienced in temperate climates. My fellow students noticed the change in my work and attitude. Chen Wei, who had become my closest friend in the program, mentioned that I seemed to have found my calling in extreme environment design. She was right. I was discovering a passion for architectural challenges that I'd never known existed. Technical complexity and life-or-death stakes of Arctic construction appealed to something deep in my personality that had been suppressed by years of comfortable, conventional practice. When we returned to Trondheim in March, I threw myself into research with an intensity that surprised even Dr. Nordahl. I began developing innovative foundation systems for buildings on unstable permafrost, combining traditional techniques with modern materials in ways that could revolutionize Arctic construction. My designs caught the attention of several international research organizations that were struggling with infrastructure challenges in polar regions. The breakthrough came during my second year when I was selected to participate in a collaborative project between Norwegian and Canadian researchers, designing sustainable housing for indigenous communities in the Canadian Arctic. The project would require spending 6 months in Iqaluit, Nunavut, working directly with Inuit community leaders to develop housing solutions that respected traditional building practices while incorporating modern energy efficiency and structural engineering. Before departing for Canada, I received an unexpected message through the university's International Student Services. Marcus had tracked me down through my academic program, and he wanted to share news from Seattle that he thought I should know. Emma had finally resurfaced after 18 months of complete silence, but her return had not gone as she'd probably hoped. According to Marcus, Emma and Ryan had burned through the stolen money within 6 months of their Southeast Asian adventure. Their relationship had disintegrated somewhere in Thailand when Ryan met a younger travel blogger who offered him better opportunities for growing his social media following. Emma had been abandoned in Bangkok with maxed-out credit cards, no return ticket, and warrants waiting for her back in Seattle related to the embezzlement charges. She'd eventually made her way back to the United States by contacting her parents and begging them to wire her money for a plane ticket. But returning to Seattle meant facing immediate arrest on multiple fraud charges filed by her former business partner Robert Kim. Emma was currently out on bail while awaiting trial, living with her parents and working at a coffee shop to pay for legal representation. Marcus told me that Emma had asked him for my contact information, claiming she needed to apologize and explain her actions. He'd refused to share any details about my whereabouts, but he wanted me to know that she was actively trying to reach me. The news should have stirred up old emotions or curiosity about what Emma might want to say. But I found myself feeling nothing but mild disappointment in her continued poor judgment. The woman who had once seemed so sophisticated and successful had revealed herself to be impulsive, dishonest, and ultimately self-destructive. Her grand romantic adventure with Ryan had predictably collapsed, leaving her facing serious legal consequences and a ruined reputation. I felt sorry for her parents, who were dealing with the fallout of their daughter's choices. But I had no desire to revisit our failed relationship or provide her with any form of absolution. My work in Iqaluit proved to be the most fulfilling professional experience of my life, Working directly with community elders and traditional builders, I learned construction techniques that had been passed down through generations of Arctic survival. These methods were incredibly sophisticated despite using only materials available in polar environments: caribou hide, whalebone, compressed snow, and carefully selected stones. The challenge was integrating these traditional approaches with modern materials and energy systems to create housing that honored indigenous culture, while providing contemporary comfort and efficiency. It required months of careful collaboration, patient listening, and willingness to abandon preconceived notions about how buildings should be constructed. The community's master builder, an elderly Inuit man named Tunu, became an unlikely mentor who taught me more about architecture in 6 months than I'd learned in years of formal education. Tunu had an intuitive understanding of how buildings should respond to extreme weather, how living spaces should be organized to support community relationships, and how construction techniques should respect the natural environment rather than dominating it. Southern builders fight the cold, Tunu explained as we worked together on a prototype wall system. They build walls to keep cold out, but cold always wins. We build walls that breathe with cold, work with cold, make cold our friend. Building that fights environment always loses. Building that dances with environment lasts forever. His philosophy revolutionized my approach to architecture. Instead of creating structures that resisted natural forces, I began designing buildings that collaborated with environmental conditions to create comfortable, sustainable living spaces. The breakthrough led to a housing prototype that exceeded all performance expectations while costing significantly less than conventional Arctic construction methods. During my final month in Iqaluit, I received a message that would change my life once again. Lily Park, a documentary filmmaker I'd never heard of, was producing a feature film about innovative Arctic architecture and sustainable building practices in extreme environments. She'd learned about my work through academic publications and wanted to interview me for her project. Lily arrived in Iqaluit with a small film crew and an infectious enthusiasm for environmental storytelling that immediately impressed everyone in the community. She wasn't just another Southern filmmaker extracting content from indigenous communities. She approached her work with genuine respect and collaborative spirit that earned trust from even the most skeptical elders. During our first interview, I was struck by Lily's intelligence and passion for using media to promote environmental awareness. She asked thoughtful questions about the technical aspects of Arctic building, while also exploring the cultural and philosophical dimensions of sustainable design. Her documentary wasn't just about construction techniques. It was about how humans could live harmoniously with challenging environments. Instead of constantly battling against natural forces, over the week of filming, Lily and I spent long hours discussing architecture, environmental responsibility, and the role of traditional knowledge in addressing contemporary challenges. I found myself sharing ideas and aspirations that I'd never articulated to anyone else, including thoughts about how architecture could address climate change and global housing crises. Lily had grown up in the shadow of her famous cinematographer father, struggling to establish her own identity in the film industry while constantly being compared to his legendary achievements. She understood the pressure of trying to create meaningful work while living up to external expectations. And she recognized the same drive for authenticity that had led me to abandon my comfortable Seattle life for Arctic research. Our conversations extended far beyond the documentary project as we discovered shared values about environmental responsibility, cultural respect, and the importance of challenging conventional approaches to creative work. Lily had the same restless energy that had driven me to Norway, the same need to prove herself through work that genuinely mattered rather than simply advancing her career. When the filming wrapped and Lily prepared to return to Vancouver for post-production, I realized that something significant had developed between us. It wasn't the desperate romance that had characterized Emma's relationship with Ryan, but rather a deeper connection based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine intellectual compatibility. 2 years later, I returned to Vancouver for the premiere of Lily's documentary at the International Film Festival. The movie, titled Building Tomorrow, Architecture for a Changing World, had been selected for multiple festivals and was generating significant attention from environmental organizations and architecture schools worldwide. My Arctic housing project featured prominently in the film. But more importantly, Lily had created a powerful narrative about how traditional building wisdom could address contemporary climate challenges. The premiere was held at the Queen Elizabeth Theatre, and I was amazed to see how many people were interested in sustainable architecture and indigenous building practices. The audience included government officials, environmental activists, architecture students, and community leaders from across Canada. During the post-screening discussion, several attendees approached me with opportunities for collaborative projects and research positions. What I didn't expect was seeing Emma in the lobby after the screening. She looked dramatically different from the confident businesswoman I'd known in Seattle. Her hair was shorter and unstyled. She'd lost considerable weight, and she wore the kind of inexpensive clothing that suggested ongoing financial struggles. When our eyes met across the crowded space, she immediately started walking toward me with an expression of desperate determination. "Alex, I've been trying to reach you for months. I know you probably don't want to see me, but I need to explain what happened and apologize for everything I put you through." Her voice carried none of the authority and confidence I remembered. Instead, she sounded tentative and defeated, like someone who had learned difficult lessons about consequences and accountability. I glanced around the lobby and noticed that several people were watching our interaction with obvious curiosity. "Emma, this isn't the time or place for that conversation. I'm here to celebrate Lily's achievement, not revisit our past." Emma was persistent, following me toward the exit despite my clear discomfort with the situation. "Please, just give me 5 minutes. No, I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to understand what really happened between Ryan and me. The media reports made everything sound so calculated, but the truth is much more complicated." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet Emma at a quiet coffee shop several blocks from the theater. Lily was busy with press interviews and celebration activities, so I had time to finally hear whatever Emma felt compelled to share. Part of me was curious about her perspective on events that had completely changed my life's trajectory. Sitting across from Emma in the dimly lit cafe, I was struck by how much both of us had changed since our last confrontation in Seattle. She looked older, more fragile, and completely lacking the self-assurance that had once defined her personality. Meanwhile, I felt confident and grounded in ways that would have been impossible during our relationship. "Alex, I want you to know that leaving you wasn't premeditated. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to destroy our relationship and steal money from my company. It happened gradually, and by the time I realized how far I'd gone, I felt trapped by my own lies and poor decisions." Emma's explanation was longer and more detailed than I'd expected. She described how reconnecting with Ryan had initially felt like harmless nostalgia, but had gradually awakened feelings of restlessness and dissatisfaction with her life in Seattle. She admitted that our relationship had become comfortable but passionless, and that Ryan represented excitement and spontaneity that she'd been missing. "I convinced myself that what I was doing was justified because you seemed content with our predictable routine. You never pushed for adventure or challenged me to grow beyond my comfort zone. Ryan made me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible." Her words stung because they contained elements of truth that I'd been reluctant to acknowledge. Our relationship had become routine and safe, lacking the passion and growth that sustain long-term partnerships. While her methods were inexcusable, Emma's core complaint about our relationship wasn't entirely unfair. The financial theft, according to Emma, had started as small amounts to cover Ryan's travel expenses for content creation. She'd rationalized these payments as legitimate business investments, but they'd gradually escalated as Ryan's demands for funding increased, and their relationship became more serious. By the time she realized the scale of her embezzlement, she felt she had no choice but to flee with Ryan rather than face the legal consequences. The worst part is that Ryan abandoned me the moment our money ran out and legal problems started surfacing. He found someone new within weeks and left me stranded in Bangkok with nothing. Everything I'd sacrificed for him meant absolutely nothing when circumstances became difficult. Emma's story was ultimately a cautionary tale about making impulsive decisions. based on romantic fantasy rather than realistic assessment of consequences. She'd destroyed her business, ruined her reputation, and damaged relationships with family and friends for a man who had no genuine commitment to their future together. "I'm not asking you to forgive me or take me back," Emma continued, tears forming in her eyes. "I just need you to know that I realize how badly I hurt you and how wrong my choices were. Seeing you tonight, seeing how successful and confident you've become, I understand what I threw away." I listened to Emma's apology with a mixture of sympathy and detachment. Her suffering was clearly genuine, and I felt sorry for the painful lessons she'd learned about consequences and accountability. But I also realized that her betrayal had ultimately been a gift that forced me to discover capabilities and passions I never would have explored within our comfortable but limiting relationship. Emma, I appreciate you sharing your perspective, and I'm sorry you faced such difficult consequences. But I need you to understand that I'm grateful for how everything turned out. Your choices forced me to rebuild my life in ways that have made me much happier and more fulfilled than I ever was in Seattle. When I explained my work in Arctic architecture, my research with indigenous communities, and my relationship with Lily, Emma's expression shifted from hope to resignation. She realized that I hadn't just survived her betrayal, I'd used it as motivation to create a completely different and better life. "I can see that you've found where you belong," Emma said quietly. "I'm happy for you, Alex. You deserve someone who appreciates what an amazing person you are." As we prepared to leave the cafe, Emma asked one final question that revealed how much she'd learned about herself through her mistakes. "Do you think you would have ever left Seattle and pursued this path if I hadn't forced you to start over?" I considered her question seriously before responding. Probably not. I was too comfortable and risk-averse to make such dramatic changes voluntarily. In a strange way, your betrayal gave me permission to pursue dreams I'd been too afraid to chase. Walking back toward the theater district, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed since that devastating day when I discovered Emma's deception. Her betrayal had shattered my assumptions about love, trust, and security, but it had also freed me from a relationship and lifestyle that were ultimately unsatisfying for both of us. When I rejoined Lily at the festival after-party, she immediately noticed my thoughtful mood and asked about my conversation with Emma. I shared the basic details of our discussion, and Lily listened with the kind of empathetic understanding that had drawn me to her from our first meeting. "It sounds like she needed to apologize more than you needed to hear it," Lily observed. "Sometimes people seek forgiveness not to help those they've hurt, but to relieve their own guilt about past actions." Lily's insight was typically perceptive and helped me understand why Emma's apology had felt both genuine and inadequate. While I appreciated her acknowledgement of wrongdoing, her words couldn't change the past or alter the trajectory of my current life. Later that evening, as Lily and I walked along the Vancouver waterfront discussing our future plans, I realized that Emma's betrayal had led me to exactly where I belonged. Working in extreme environments, collaborating with indigenous communities, and building a relationship with someone who shared my values and ambitions felt infinitely more authentic than the safe, predictable life I'd been living in Seattle. Emma had chosen Ryan and his promise of adventure and passion, but their relationship had been built on deception and financial theft, rather than genuine compatibility. In contrast, my connection with Lily had developed naturally through shared work, mutual respect, and aligned values about environmental responsibility and cultural sensitivity. As we stood watching the lights reflect on the harbor, Lily took my hand and smiled. "Ready for our next adventure?" I smiled back, thinking about the collaborative projects we were planning and the life we were building together. Emma's mysterious friend Ryan had promised her love that would last forever, but his commitment had evaporated the moment circumstances became challenging. Lily's love, based on friendship, respect, and shared purpose, truly did feel like it could last forever. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.